What's up, guys? Dominic again here with another video. Today I'm going to be presenting my synthesis for the question that is at the core of all of Western philosophy, and that is whether or not we live in a state of being or becoming. And they say this debate is about 2,500 years old, could be older, but the main philosophers to represent these two concepts are Parmenides and Heraclitus, who both lived at around the same time in ancient Greece. And first I'm going to describe Parmenides' concept of being as he represents the side of being. And to Parmenides, being was a static thing that had no beginning or end and was eternal. Being contains all things, and anything outside of being does not exist. And Parmenides came to this conclusion by asking the question of, if the universe is in a state of constant motion, then something must have started it. And if something started that motion, what started the motion? What caused something to move? And his answer was nothing. And his conclusion was, if nothing caused something to move, then it will eventually revert to the state of nothing again. And to him, this was a contradiction because something cannot emerge from nothing. Therefore, movement is an illusion. Heraclitus, on the other hand, describes the exact opposite. Heraclitus represents becoming, where to him, the universe is in a constant state of flux. His most famous quote of all is, "No one steps in the same river twice." And what this means is, the moment before you step in the river and the moment after you step in the river, you are a different person. You have become something that you were not, because you have moved. The cells in your body have moved and rearranged themselves, even if only minutely. Therefore, you are constantly changing. And not only that, the river itself is moving. The moment before you step into the river is at a certain position. And then after you step into the river, it is at a new position. And to Heraclitus, this meant that all things are moving. And he even claims that war is the father of all things. So, through stress and conflict, the universe is constantly becoming something it was not. And the difference between being and becoming has essentially influenced all of Western philosophy who came after these two philosophers. And I think they have been unable to properly synthesize these two individuals for the most part. So first I'm going to describe my line of reasoning that led me to my synthesis, and then I'm going to present my synthesis. So when I first came across the concept of being and becoming, I really didn't think there was that much difference between them. And I thought they were the same thing initially. I thought we're being ourselves in this moment. But the next moment, we've become a different version of ourselves. And when I was doing that, I was personally tying this to what I was doing in the moment. Okay? I was looking at it as, so I'm looking at these philosophers, and through that act, I'm being a learner. And I'm trying to become more educated than I was before. And the problem with this line of reasoning is When you watch a movie, you're watching it frame by frame. But when you take the movie or the book or whatever, it's all one thing. And to an eternal being, it doesn't need to experience the movie frame by frame. It can just see the movie all at once in an eternal moment of limitless potential. Or in this case, its potential which has formed a particular outcome, whether it's your life or the events of the day or whatever. And then this led to my next line of reasoning. It basically comes down to, at the center of both words, being and becoming, is the word be. And as Confucius says, to be or not to be, that is the question. So what is the more correct be? What is more of a be? Is it being or is it becoming? When you look at the word being, it implies a strong sense of effortlessness. It doesn't need to become something else because it's already complete. But when you look at becoming, it's as if something is trying to come to be, or something is trying to come into a state of being. And from this perspective, being is more correct because it doesn't need to become a being, it already is being. Whereas becoming is stuck in a trap of trying to achieve being. And so this led to the next line of reasoning, where I was thinking about Satan and the demiurge. I wasn't even thinking about Heraclitus or Parmenides or their concept of being and becoming. And Satan is the adversarial force. The demiurge is the imitator god. The adversarial force goes against that which is. And the demiurge wants to be that which is. And from this perspective, I realize that Heraclitus, through describing becoming, is describing the adversarial force. The adversarial force is not accepting the being that you are and trying to become something that you're not. And this is exactly what Satan and the demiurge try to do. And also, as I mentioned, Heraclitus mentions that war is the father of all things. And if we look at this from a biblical theological perspective, the one to go to war is Lucifer or Satan. He wants to basically go against the state of being, which is God's kingdom, and become his own kingdom. But to do this, he must step in the river. The river that no man steps in twice. This river that Heraclitus talks about is endless. And once a person enters this river, they are subject to the current of the river. However, the choice to enter this river is entirely up to the individual. And this is where the synthesis arises between being and becoming. They are choices that we make in our lives. It's a matter of where are we going to stand? Where are we going to anchor ourselves to? If we anchor ourselves to being, we are anchoring ourselves to a firm foundation, a firm ground that is not going to leave us astray. But if we anchor ourselves to becoming, or if we try to stand in becoming, we are essentially casting our anchor into a bottomless abyss with a current that's going 100 miles an hour and leads to nowhere. This is why I say, when you enter the river that Heraclitus is talking about, you are subject to the current of the river. Because when you enter the state of becoming, you are trying to achieve an objective that has no end. Being already holds all potential within it. So to become something that is not being is to try and turn being into something that it's not. All of us are a part of being, and when we go against our being or that which is, we are attempting to impose fleeting illusions on the world which only satisfy our momentary egoic pleasures or securities or comforts. One requires tremendous amounts of effort for a task that never ends, and the other requires no effort for a moment which is eternal. Once you realize that you are being, you realize that you are that which is, and you don't need to become something that it's not. Parmenides says there is only that which is, and that which is static. But we have the choice to go against the stillness of eternity and become something that it's not. However, going down this path ultimately leads to nowhere, or a path of interference. The reason that this path goes nowhere is because each moment is treated as something to become something that you were not in the previous moment. You're trying to fill an endless hole by attaching yourself to identity or material pleasures and not attaching yourself to the principles of eternity. And that is what being is all about. This becomes painfully apparent when we look at the isms of ideology. If is simply existence itself, then there is only one correct ism, and other isms are flux. The one correct ism is anarchism and voluntarism, because those are the only isms in alignment with natural law and eternal truth. And the reason that these isms are in alignment with natural law, which is the static state of being as it manifests itself in our universe, is because these are the only isms that respect the free will of each individual. And this is why I say being contains all potential within it. Because when each individual is actually expressing their free will, relationships reach unprecedented heights that have never been really achieved in human history. The cages of becoming will be removed. The cages of false ideologies, things like communism or socialism, or things like nihilism or utilitarianism, or any other type of ism you can imagine. Anything that is not in alignment with natural law, which is basically the fact that free will is what is static, and interference with free will creates a state of flux. Any ideology that does not describe something like that is ultimately false. And when we look to the lives of Heraclitus and Parmenides, they both reflect their philosophies in strange ways. On one hand, you have Parmenides, who chose to live in the city. Cities are, of course, a strong place of flux because cities force this idea of becoming on us. They want us to become something that we are not typically through identity. Cities rely on individuals attaching themselves to identity. And Parmenides chose to live in the city. He chose to, in his own way, bring order to the city by imposing laws and helping the rulers of the city create a more orderful life for those who depended on the rulers of the city. But on the other hand, you have Heraclitus, who was a man who was so disgusted in what he saw in the world, he retreated to nature. And this is because everywhere Heraclitus looked, within people, he saw a state of becoming. He saw them trying to become something that they're not by attaching themselves to false illusions. And he wanted to get away from it. This is why he's known as the weeping philosopher, because he failed to realize that it's not the universe that is creating this state of flux. It is people's choice to live out of alignment with the universe to create this state of flux. But to get away from this, Heraclitus decided to retreat to a place where he could find that static being, or at least as close to a place he thought he could find it, in nature. And Heraclitus is said to have a very poor relationship with the people, unlike Parmenides. He said things like, the people should hang themselves and leave the city to the children. And he's often described as angry or depressed even. And this is because Heraclitus saw his philosophy in the people he lived with, and he did not like it. So even Heraclitus does not like becoming, even though he might argue for it. And this is reflected in his life. On top of this, because as I stated, all of Western philosophy is basically built upon this question. This also rectifies many other philosophical problems. Because many philosophical problems, as I stated, stem from this debate. So one of these problems is David Hume's guillotine of we cannot derive an ought from an is, or we cannot look at the objective world and determine what is the best way to live or behave. And this is just simply false. If we take this from a Parmenides perspective, there is only the is, and anything that is not contained within the is does not exist. Therefore, the ought is a part of the is, because anything that is not does not exist. So when they are trying to say these things of separating the ought from the is, this is a falsity, because through the progression of time that we can observe in our life, our decision of whether we ought not or should do something will eventually become the is. And when you look at it from an eternal perspective, you'll realize that the ought always was the is. Because anything outside of the is cannot exist. And furthermore, when we look to this statement of we can't look at the objective world and decide what is moral, I don't think people have asked themselves certain questions. Questions of, would I like to be assaulted? Would I like to be trespassed? Would I like to be deceived? Would I like harm to come about me? in my life. And the vast, vast majority of people, I'm talking many billions of people around the world, are undoubtedly going to say, no, I don't want harm to come about my life. And if everyone can agree, generally they do not want harm in their lives. And we can look at the effects that harm causes in people's life. We can come to a strong conclusion of deriving from these facts how we should or should not behave. Because that which is and that which ought are one and the same. We must ground ourselves through principles and eternal truth, because that is what is static. And through this eternal truth, we can become the unique individuals that nature has made us to be. Through aligning ourselves with natural law, the relationships and possibilities within our lives will reach limits unprecedented. Okay? And this is going to be because people aren't going to be living in fear of coercion, of if they break one of these tens of thousands of laws that exist, they're going to have some sort of legal repercussion. That won't exist anymore if people align themselves to being through principles. When we live in this state of becoming, we destroy these limits because we are not being the unique individuals which nature has made us to be. We are instead attaching ourselves to the world and the fleeting moments which make up our lives. When we do this, when we attach ourselves to the form, when we attach ourselves to our identity at work, or politically, or whether it's through race, or whether it's even financially, we are limiting ourselves because we're trying to become something we're not. We're eternal beings. And these things that most people attach themselves to don't even sustain our lives here. Things that do sustain our lives, like food and shelter and water, those are the necessities. Those are the things that keep us living here on the earth, and that is what's a part of the eternal truth. This is what's been static throughout all of human history. We need these essentials, not we need to go to the ballot box to cast our vote for the next president or congressman. And this is ultimately what it comes down to. This is the synthesis. Being and becoming are ultimately the grounds upon which we stand. Being is the firm ground, which permits all possibilities within our limitation and our form as a human being. But the river of becoming is not a ground at all. It is a current that takes its participants with it wherever it chooses. People essentially cannot enact their will over becoming because becoming has no end. Whereas eternity is the beginning and the end all in one moment. And that's what it comes down to, guys. I hope you enjoyed my synthesis. If you didn't, you can let me know if you disagreed. And I'll see you guys again.